We are live. So hello everyone. Welcome to the release party of Stories of Rebellion, the latest anthology published by the Selkie publications. My name is Zala Chattic, and I will be your moderator today. I am the director and the chief editor for the Selkie publications. And I'm super excited to get started. We have a wonderful launch planned for you today with readings from 10 of our amazing authors. And there will also be a Q&A section at the end of the event. So if you have any questions for our authors, or if you think of any as they're reading, feel free to pop those in the chat, and we'll get to those after we're done with the live readings. Before we get started, I did want to just very quickly say a few words about the Selkie. So we are a nonprofit organization that champions and publishes traditionally underrepresented writers. We've been around since 2018, and we regularly publish contributions on our website, as well as in digital and print anthologies. So I did want to mention that we are a 100% volunteer-run publication, meaning that everyone on the team, including the management, is a volunteer. So I just wanted to give a massive shout out to my team, who are absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for volunteering and donating your time and your skills. I value each and every one of you, and I'm very grateful for your help. And if anyone watching us would like to support us, Becky, our chat moderator, will be providing you with a link to our donations page. So if you would like to make a donation, you can do that through our website to help keep us going. We do have quite a busy schedule today, so we're gonna get started pretty quickly. Stories of Rebellion is now officially live. So if you would like to purchase your copy of the anthology, you can do that through our website. We are also available on several retail sites, but obviously the profit margin is a bit better for us if you do it through our website. So let's try to support the little guy and not Amazon. All profits are going to go through covering the business running costs to make sure that we can keep organizing and publishing these incredible authors. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. Like I said, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat, and Becky will make sure to write them down and forward them to me so we can get those answered for you during the Q&A section at the end of the event, okay? Our first author is Shantha Chinniah. Shantha is an Edinburgh writer with an MLit in creative writing from the University of Glasgow. She also enjoys illustration and cartooning, and today she will be reading from her short story, Shadow. Shantha, take it away.
Thanks, Ella. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and thanks to the Selkie for organising everything, and I'm looking forward to reading everyone else's pieces as well. So as Ella says, I'm Shantha, and my short story, Shadow, was part of a group of speculative, largely dystopian stories that I've written over the last few years. I would describe it as a kind of claustrophobic political mystery. It touches on themes like rebellion, of course, but also kind of the artifice of power, and how untrustworthy appearances can be when there's a kind of repressive and oppressive context. So on the online promotion, I read the start of the story, but now I want to read a short excerpt from around the middle, where the central character, Locke, is getting increasingly anxious about the tension and the danger that he can feel around him. And this prompts him to think about why he took on the kind of assignment that he's on, and how it contrasts with his quiet life as a ferryman in the countryside where he lives with his partner, Leah. Okay. He'd started working these assignments by random coincidence. On one boatload of tourists was a woman he had served with, though only briefly, as she'd got transferred to intelligence after her first month. There was bitterness in his group of recruits at that, lots of talk of connections. She hadn't noticed him when she first got on the boat, but when she did, she not only recognized him, but was intensely interested in his life. He'd been confused by the attention until a week later, when she dropped by their cottage and made the offer. She was still working in intelligence and said they'd been looking for someone like him for a long time. He hadn't wanted to do it, but each job paid more than Leah and he earned in a year. Leah said he'd be stupid not to. Now they were able to see a doctor when they needed, and he found this restored some dignity he hadn't realized he'd lost. The adrenaline that came with the work still made him nauseous, though, even 2 years in. What are you doing there? There's been a change to the plan. We're cutting down your stage time. Maya has a copy of the new script. Go and see her. Locke tried to apologize, but the assistant had already left, so he set out into the main battleground of the room, walking slowly as he tried to remember who Maya was. He thought Maya had briefed him before, maybe at that civic centre opening last summer. He just wished he was better with faces. Short of someone having a gnarled scar, faces just registered with a generic face equality. If someone changed their hair colour, they may as well have made themselves into a different person. A staffer carrying a honeycomb of coffee cups tutted as they bumped into him. Locke arrived at the centre of the cavernous space, having decided Maya was likely to be in the animated group by the whiteboard. He paused at the sudden increase in the volume of the room. There was always security, naturally, but at least 20 additional Special Protection Force guards had come in and bunched around the base of the huge doors at the end of the room. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Next up, we have Sayani Dame. Sayani is a bibliophile, a compulsive traveler, and sustainability enthusiast. Her work has been featured on Muse India, Borderless Journal, Women's Web, Indian Review, and Mysticeti, and won a contest at Story Mirror. She is trained as an engineer, and she works as a product manager at a software company. And today she will be reading from her short story, The Plan.
Thank you so much, Zara. Thanks for everything. I'm Shani, like she has introduced. And big thanks to the Selkie for this wonderful opportunity. I'm really looking forward to the anthology and to read not just my story there, but everybody else's who are on this call. Just a little bit about myself. So I live in Bangalore, India, with my son and husband. And most of my life, I've been a writer by passion and a techie by profession. And it's only last year that I decided to share some of my writings with literary magazines in and outside of India. And the journey has been truly fulfilling and exciting for me. So coming to the story is about a housekeeper who stays with her employer during the time of the pandemic, where everything is very restrictive and opportunities are fewer. And she finds herself in a situation where she's being harassed by the employer's son who visits them from time to time. So the excerpt is towards the end of the story, and here is what happens. So on a night when she feels like she's sitting at the bottom of a well, she distracts herself by watching videos on her phone. A monkey doing antics in a shoebox amuses her. She barely registers the faint knock on her door. She opens the door, still laughing at the monkey. A hand thrusts in and covers her mouth while the other grabs her waist. Gotham forces his way into the room and closes the door with his back. She is too shocked to respond. When did he get in? He must have come in minutes ago using his key. The ceiling is spinning. No, it's the fan. As her head knocks against the wall, her mind springs back. She doesn't resist him. She encircles her arms around his neck. It seems to excite him. He grabs her thigh. As her hands meet behind his back, she snaps open the big safety pin on her bangle and thrusts it into his back of his neck with all the strength she can muster. His screams are sure to reach the old couple's room. He recoils. She grabs the moment to free herself and throws the door of her room open. In a few seconds, the door to the old couple's room opens, but that time, Gotham has escaped to his room, where the TV is on. Sonali stands in the hallway. The old man comes out, looking bewildered. He briefly glances at Sonali, then fixes his gaze on his son. Gotham, you? Sorry, did I wake you up? I was watching the highlights of last year's match. They just missed an easy ball. Sonali sees the old man is ready to go back to bed. It is a dead end. She is just a maid who can't keep to her room. You should go to sleep, Sonali. The old man's voice trails off as he shuts his door behind him. Sleep eludes her for the remainder of the night. Every few minutes she struggles to breathe as she thinks of what could have happened to her. As dawn breaks in with its aura of clarity, she hears the old lady's footsteps going to the bathroom. Nothing bad ever happens in the morning, she assures herself. She goes to the kitchen. A green nylon bag filled to the brim with groceries sits on the kitchen slab. It is from the list she made last week. She starts boiling the water on the stove. Everybody, including Gotham, would soon demand tea. As she empties the masoor dal into its designated glass jar, she thinks of the pretend nothing happened act she would have to play all day. Below the banana, a black and green packet catches her eyes. The rat poison she put on the grocery list sits in front of her. As bubbles form all over the water's surface, she thinks of an old story her grandmother had once told her. It was about a queen of olden times who licked poison concealed in her finger ring to spare herself from rape and misery when invaders defeated the king. Different times. She touches the safety pins on her bangles like a warrior caressing his sword. Last night should teach Gotham not to mess with her, but she needs a plan if the worst happens. She looks at the rat poison and gauges how much sugar and cardamom could conceal its taste in a sugary cup of masala tea. Her gaze drifts from the poison and fixates on an unaware Gotham. The blazing fire of the stove reflects in her eyes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Next up, we have Petra Zajc, who is joining us from Slovenia. Petra is a young aspiring author with a deep love for everything dark, wicked, and romantic. She loves writing stories that make people laugh, but she believes, as her writing indicates, that there is no real genuine laughter without some darkness behind it. Her prose has already reached more than 250,000 reads online, and she is currently working on an improved and rewritten version of her novel that was beloved by many young people on the internet. And today, Petra will be reading from her short story, The Roots of Her Soul.
Thank you for this introduction. So I've prepared first a little speech. So writing has always been kind of a way of like venting and to express myself. So to express myself, my concerns, my woes, and what's truly inspired me. This is partly the reason why I chose to submit this story to the Selkie's anthology. So there's the rebellious part, which kind of dives into this globalization, which seemingly tries to erase these different cultures and just merge them all into one. And the other part is that I wanted to celebrate my origin as, a Slavic person, since it's exactly that origin and that culture that people have been shunned for throughout history, and they were taught to be ashamed of it. So that's kind of the reason why I submitted and wrote this story. So now I would just like to move on the excerpt. She let the darkness fall upon her eyelids. The dark, however, did not last long. Suddenly before her, she could see invasions of other tribes, the burning down of villages, children and babies being taken away from their mothers' arms by the Turks and the Nazis, entire families stuffed into concentration camps. She saw men rebelling with pitchforks and later being tortured with red-hot iron pincers. Men setting bonfires to send fire signals about the incoming invasions from the east. She saw men traveling abroad, working hard, back-breaking jobs to send money home to their families. And she saw children being beaten up for calling plums slive and bears medvedki instead of using their German counterparts. The scene shifted, and she saw people holding hands and dancing, and a mother teaching her daughter how to braid her hair. She saw beautifully dreadful Morana calling to the cold, brutal winds and the deadly snowstorm to swallow up the land before Kurent scared her away. And Vesna, the bringer of spring, evoked buds out of flowers and woke the animals from their sleep. She saw the hunched figure of Baba Yaga stalking boys through the forest, and the Goldhorn standing proud on a mountain ledge as a hunter was swallowed by an avalanche. The young man's eyes were still fixed on the precious prize. She saw young men working in the fields and women weaving lace, while a domovoi stood in the background and released upon the family every blessing that his magical disposition allowed him. Girls running through the forest with freshly woven baskets, carrying food for everyone who was busy working in the fields to ensure they would escape Morana's unforgiving winters. And then she saw today's youth fighting for nature, children being fascinated by the carnival parade with Kurens, the Slavic nations giving each other concessions in a foreign and unknown country, all of them seeing each other not as cultural allies, but as family, wherever in the world that may be. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Next up, we have Jack Hinks, who's joining us from Scotland. Jack is a poet, musician, and photographer, known for his introspective style, cross-media experimentation, and collaborative work with hundreds of poets in the Scottish spoken word scene. Jack is a seasoned performer and writer. His work can be found in the I Am Loud production, NaPoWriMo scrapbook, and at various live nights in Scotland. Jack is currently working on his first collection, and today he will read for us his poem Sunlight.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Zala and everyone at the Selkie for first of all accepting and putting on such an amazing event. I'm humbled to be here with such amazing writers and such an eclectic mix of writers and performers as well. I was told I might be able to read possibly two short ones, but this first one is going to be Sunlight. So this was taken from National Poetry Writing Month last year. So in April, if you're unaware, the challenge to write a poem every day, and the theme for me, I guess, resonated with rebellion in that it was just small everyday rebellions. This is Sunlight. I always take things to the end, cast a crew, do a table read, plot the stage in tape and buy all the props before I've thought it through. If it isn't viable, it isn't worth it. This deep-set desire to plan without checking if it's what I want. I keep my heart behind a pair of steel curtains because I want it protected from drive-by shootings and neighbors and sunlight. It doesn't matter. I have a head full of finished drafts, but I just can't seem to write a first. And I'm so tired and broke, and I need to write a poem that won't rhyme and finish a song that won't sell and go to the gym and cook dinner and sit in the shower, but none of it's ever going to happen because I can never just start. And I wonder if any of it matters. Dedicating my life to taking record, working backwards from the end, when sitting in the park, eyes closed, notebook empty, and feeling the sun carve a smile into my face would be the greatest protest to living. Thank you. That one's Sunlight, and this next one is from an upcoming publication. This one's called Color Studies, so hope you enjoy it. Thank you again. Today, it is difficult. I'm mixing too many paints and not liking the result. I'm the sum of my parts. Too much. Have you ever mixed paints? People often forget how physical mistakes are. I've woken up with cramped wrists, tethered legs, and tension headaches every day this week. My eyes close involuntarily, unable to process the light. So I mix in something darker. No one is forcing me to stir. No reward comes of it, and most days I question the point of color at all. I'm growing tired of what I cannot be. I cannot be blue today. I cannot shine or bloom or stand or lift. I am barely an accent of myself. I'm a workman that resents his tools, forgetting that I cannot leave my fingers at home or leave my brain in white spirit, slowly eating away at the flecks that grow on me. In my daily talk with God, she tells me that sadness is a gift, a prize, a lens through which to see the world, and it is my job to represent it. I may yet not be a painter, but I have 28 years of mixing experience. So tomorrow I may stir, and I may start with a perfect grey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack. Next up, we have David Milley, who is joining us from New Jersey. David has been writing verse and poetry since the 1970s while working as a technical editor and web applications developer. His work appears in Bay Windows, RFD, Friends Journal, Capsule Stories, and Feral. Retired now, David lives in southern New Jersey with his husband and partner of 47 years, Warren Davey, who has made his living as a farmer, woodcutter, nurseryman, auctioneer, beekeeper, and cook. These days, Warren tends his garden and keeps honeybees. David walks and writes. David is going to read for us his poem, No Heaven of Animals, and I believe he also has another little poem for us as a special treat.
Thanks, Hala, for having me here. I brought two rebellious poems with me today. This first one is an answer to an unfortunately famous poem by James Dickey. My version is called No Heaven of Animals. Coming home that August night, we fought. Too long at the bars, we'd drunk too much. I don't remember what the fight was about. Something you said, no doubt, set me off. I shouted at you, you shot back. I flounced off to the far end of the train, set my back to yours. 3 men sitting nearby called you out for everyone to hear, all those names they use. I turned and saw you pull your hat down. They pointed at you and laughed. They stood, loomed above you. I jumped into the aisle. The train reached our station and stopped. You made for the west platform door. I went east and we both darted downstairs. 3 fag bashers followed you, menaced you. Fist up, you swore, offered to fight them all, there on that stair. On station level, they got set to pounce, then saw me charging from the other side. Skittering, they jumped the stile and ran. You chased until they were gone. You returned to the shelter of my arms. Sometimes the lion, sure of its meal, misjudges its prey and loosens its grip. The snake strikes at the claw and wins free. And this next poem, it doesn't appear in the Selkie, but I felt like it made a good companion piece, and Zala was kind enough to let me read it here. It first appeared in the online journal Discretionary Love in February of 2023. It's called Phoenix. I've had to start my life again 3 times since I met you. It's not an easy thing to do. Even now, I hear it start, whispers when I pass, claims that what I've done must be undone, charges never true. It doesn't matter what I do. If I should turn away, the whispers rise. When I turn back, they whirl like chaff. If I ignore them, do my work, and make it seem like play, I see another claim my work, and hear the whispers laugh. When trapped alone, the bravest bird will close his eyes and play at being dead. When courage fails, he'll flail his claws and strike and scratch and scream. But, shielding other lives, he'll fly up into the hunter's face to make the killer pause. I'll start again, 12 times, if nothing else will do. I'd spend my life 1,000 times to spend my life with you. Thank you.
That was gorgeous, David. Thank you. Next up, we have A.W. Earl, who is joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland. A.W. is a writer, storyteller, and poet. They learned their craft on both the DIY punk poetry scene of the Medway towns, as well as the more formal atmosphere on the University of East Anglia's Literature and Creative Writing course. Their work is often concerned with gender, deviant bodies, and folklore. Their debut novel, Time's Fool, was published by Unbound in 2018. And today they will be reading the poem. This poem is about disease, not bigotry.
Hi, the title might be slightly ironic. I'm only going to be reading a little bit of it because it is quite long. It came in a bit over 5 minutes. Thank you so much for Selkie for hosting it. I wasn't sure it would ever see the light of day. It's a poem about disease, not bigotry, and it's about rabies, and it's about Jane Eyre, not two topics you'd normally put together. But I think really what it's about is the way that certain types of victims are treated as opposed to other types of victims, the way some anger is seen as unacceptable, and particularly the way that the threat of madness and institutionalization is used and weaponized against transmasculine people. So I'm just going to read the third part of it. How silently can you make a person scream? In furious rabies, it is thought the main site of sickness is the brain. Where does fury end and sickness start? Any animal would fight for its own life. If you're going to take its hands, its words, its kicking feet, you're going to act surprised, but it will bite. For my part, I'd burn that bitch in her bed. Gut Rochester, set the whole damn place ablaze. I'm not averse to red upon my hands, and when the world is this mad making, it is cruelty to be sane. If rabies is suspected, the animal is killed. And why is anger infection's proof? I do not salivate, I spit, but all the same, there are hands keen to catch me if I fall, a needle all filled up for my own good. This is not a cure. I do not trust their wet mouths, the blankness in their eyes. When all the world is sick, is it madness to be well? If rabies is suspected, the animal is killed. Here's a better tale. Never trust a wild thing acting tame. Encephalitic rabies is characterized by apathy, headaches, delirium. The virus travels from the brain to other parts. There are seizures, salivation. The most common vector of infection is the bite. We've all got teeth, love. I've seen yours well enough. It can infect the eyes, the skin, the gastrointestinal tract. Do you know? It can even infect the heart. So tell me then, the difference between healthy flesh fighting to live and animal become disease. You find it in this torturing, this starving out, in this fear of water which could prevent the spread. This is sickness made self-righteous, virus as puppet master, breaking every shred of bond you said we shared. If rabies is suspected, the animal is killed. But some of us have no gauntlets and no gun. Some of us are all aches and vaccines and bloodlust. God knows we're tired of it by now. The illness dragging on in you. The hate that knows no family, no kindness and no love. The infection that would gladly claim us too. Eventually, it progresses. Paralysis, coma, death, docility. That's the killer's final tool. Your back legs collapsed, a drool that can become a scream at slightest touch. There's nothing of you left, just sickness, serving something that will kill us both. Say what you want. My legs are strong, and they hold me here at Bertha's side, a cleansing wave of flame across the sky. Some houses just deserve to burn. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next up, we have MJ Gomez, who is joining us from Saudi Arabia. MJ is the author of Love Letters from a Burning Planet. His poems appear in Surging Tide, The Lunar Journal, Lavender Bones Magazine, The Dawn Review, and elsewhere. MJ will be reading from his poem titled Love Poem in Spite of Electron Repulsion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. This event has been wonderful, and the support of the Selkie has been just incredible. I'm really so honored to be here. This evening's amazing. I'll be reading a short love poem which attempts to equate rebellion to doing the impossible, which sometimes includes loving someone. Love poem in spite of electron repulsion. For a theme. Despite everything, I am only trying to live tremendously. I have given you the world and nothing else. The heavens, unseen, at once mourn and taunt our distance, the very notion of it. Intangible borders consume, then vanish into the grins of laughing men. Once, in a dream, I held you, and even the trees smiled. Even this is transgression. Despite the border between every atom, touch registers as the shortest longing. Despite the border, we touch. Ours is the noble and eternal work of revolution.
Thank you, MJ. Next up, we have Sam Casey, who is joining us from Maryland, USA. Sam is a military instructor in the English department at the United States Naval Academy. She enjoys sailing, playing rugby, and reading poetry. And today she will be reading from her short story, Mutiny on Kerr Lake.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Sam Casey. I am teaching English at the Naval Academy right now. My short story focuses on a protagonist who has to relieve from command the captain of the pontoon boat she's on. So it was inspired by Qualifications of a Naval Officer, which is a piece written by Augustus Bell, who in a very verbose way describes the expectations for leaders in the Navy. What I tried to do is have the humor from my piece come across as a narrator that's often inebriated by her own grandiloquence, and recount a relatively insignificant event with like the utmost serious. I hope the humor of this piece highlights rather than obscures the allegorical parallels of the story, in which the protagonist has to honor the allegiance to the hull beneath their feet rather than the captain at its helm. The excerpt I'm reading is part of the exposition describing the siren call of the water and the beginning of the voyage. So without further ado, it is on July 16th, in the sweltering heat of midsummer, that we begin. A town in rural Virginia held an annual event. Clarksville sits perched on Kerr Lake, and though it is no Walden Pond, many a poet and writer have breathed inspiration out of the sunset-stained skies, being lulled gently by the ever-present wake. Once a year, Lakefest acts as a beacon, attracting all boat-owning gentry, as well as their friends and families from adjacent lands to the tiny town. Hotels are booked, tents are erected, and docks put to full use. The single street in town becomes packed with looky-loos, the woods peopled with campers and squatters, and the sacred waters littered with pontoons, leaking aluminum hull fishing vessels, and noisy cigarette speedboats. The original inhabitants of the lake know better to go into town, but no one can ignore the siren call of the water. In prior years, the Casey clan would often rise early and sail to our beach before the invaders came. But alas, our trusty sailboat had land beneath its hull due to a crack that refused to hold water out. How she yearned to fill her sails and hear the laughter of her crew as she flew past fishermen and speedsters. But until the repair was made, we were relegated to ships of others. As once was the case when meats were traded for gold, a boating trip is traded for coolers of beer, a steadfast crew, and a promise to repay. Since over the years we had captained often, we had no trouble enlisting our services to a friend and neighbor in kind. The logbook tells of two key events from the fated trip. The first was that the crafty carpenter of 25, the youngest of the crew, had gotten his hands on the mythical white lightning. Oh, how a swig would breathe the breath of life into the palest of souls. A sip transports the sommelier of sin to the peak of the highest mountain, where the crisp air clears the mind of fog. And though the descent down Moonshine's mountain is long and treacherous, the view at the top is worth the hike. As the mason jar was passed around, morale and music arose. The second event is apt to happen when life lingers too long on one song. The captain, in charge of the shanties, selected a song displeasing to the rest of the crew. When beseeched to change it, He refused until I looked at him and strongly urged him to comply with the wishes of the crew, an exhortation bordering on an order. He acquiesced, and thus my gentle rebuke for the good of the ship set in motion the cataclysmic events to follow.
Thank you, Sam. That was amazing. Next up, we have Paul Forster, who is joining us from Bristol. Paul Forster is a working class queer writer with a DIY punk background. In 2014, he founded spoken word night That's What She Said, which is now called That's What We Said, which he hosted in London until February 2020. He has also brought shows to sold-out runs at the Edinburgh Fringe and the Royal Albert Hall. From 2016 to 2021, he was a director of For Book's Sake, where he championed marginalized and underrepresented writers. In 2022, his work in progress was selected as one of TLC's LGBTQ+ free reads, and he is currently querying agents for that novel. Today, he will be reading from his short story, Mirador/Splinter.
Thanks, Ella. I've got a little bit of a cold, so I might sound a little bit froggy, so maybe that will enhance things. So the last time I did any spoken word was a very long time ago, and it was reading a Moomin story naked, so this is going to be slightly different. So I want to say thank you to you, Zala, and the Selkie team, because I really understand what it's like to run a volunteer-led organisation, and it's a challenge, so thank you so much for what you've done. And I just wanted to shout out to my For Book's Sake crew who probably are watching, and especially to Joe Flynn, who's also been published in this anthology as well. So Mirador Splinter is actually the first short story I've ever written. Normally I write long form, and it was inspired by a trip me and my partner took to Cadiz last year, watching a flamenco singer, and the flamenco singer wasn't very entertaining, but I was making lots of notes because I was inspired. So it's written in prose, but there are interspersions of what will sound like poetry, but it's meant to be song, but I'm not singing for you, I'm sorry. And it's effectively around the start of the Spanish Civil War in Cadiz. I think that is enough for you. I will get cracking. Angelo claps his hands and sings along Rodolfo's guitar, and when he stamps his battered dress shoes down, a splinter punctures the ball of his foot. He grimaces, not with pain, but with the anguish of the song. He needs to look the part for this performance. His body's percussion punctuates his voice. The soldier leans against the wine-stained brick wall to the left of the bar, despite the place being virtually empty. Their eyes lock. I want the heat from you for my body. We both have fire running through us, like water. Oh, like water, like water. Angelo pictures every curve of the soldier's body beneath his uniform, a body he's known since they'd scrabbled around snotty-nosed in the dirt with the chickens. The soldier's mother knew no word for foreigner in her dialect, so only her son played with Angelo, the Moroccan horse half-breed. A body he's explored and cherished and worshipped, a body he was willing to die for, to kill for, to live for. Two nuns drag their black habits and squat glasses of vermouth to the front of the stage and heave their ample bottoms onto sagging wicker-seated stools. Angelo's eyes flicker to them momentarily in welcome and deference before returning to the soldier. He stomps to accompany the guitar and drives the splinter deeper. The pain, mixed with the sorrow and desire of the song, make his voice crack. From a bellow into a wail. Later tonight, he'll dig the splinter out and smother the wound with honey. At the end of the song, his eyes flutter closed while he girds his heart, then stands to stomp and dance and spin. Never again will the soldier attend carnival with Angelo and Rodolfo to entertain the masses in Cathedral Square by wearing his mother's carmine flamenco dress. Never again will they quarrel in the streets for passers-by to gawp at, not now he's taken up arms. Never again will Angelo speak the soldier's name to his face or to anyone. He's being forgotten. Angelo opens his eyes to stifled applause from the nuns and a wide, knowing smile from the soldier. A gaggle of rowdy fishermen drag in their salty sweet stink before settling behind the nuns with overflowing cups of barbazole, making their hands look bloody. Rodolfo plucks a few melancholic strings and Angelo claps softly. The fishermen join in with their own claps and thigh slaps. Because I can't stand it anymore. I don't want to live like this, because I can't live without her. Angelo's eyes burn into the soldier. This evening, Angelo goes through the motions, plays old favourites in the local tongue, and pays lip service to the soldier. Flamenco is a masquerade, a despairing filibuster before the final divisive act of contrition. Folklore suggests that there are more poets in Cadiz than anywhere in Spain. Their proximity to Africa and to the New World makes them wistful, romantic, and covetous. So they write, they sing, and they pine for the unknown. Pedro, the port union leader, arrives helmed by his two burly sons and gives Angelo an askance look. He sits alone at the table in front of the soldier until his sons bring him brandy, their heads nodding almost imperceptibly to the song. Don't come repenting or begging forgiveness. I don't want your love, it's erased from my mind. I no longer want your lips. Rodolfo ekes one note out with some clever fretwork, and Angelo clicks his fingers so they elicit a simple whisper like a dove's wings taking flight. The choice of song has its intended effect. The soldier's mask slips to reveal the briefest glimpse of his real, repugnant face. A face of wanton cruelty, a face of unabashed infallibility, the face of the enemy. He blinks and reaffixes the mask to mask the dejection of the song. The cadence and performance slows, the pain subsides, but the splinter still nags like an irritable spouse. Angelo dances while Rodolfo strums quickly to conclude the song with a swirling flourish and coaxes enthusiastic applause from the slowly growing crowd. Chipped glasses of sherry are brought to Angelo and Rodolfo by the bar's patron, Abraham. Everyone knows his real name is Ibrahim, but they keep up the pretense. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And then last but not least, we have Karen Arnold, who's joining us from the UK. Karen is a writer and psychotherapist. She came to writing later in life, but is busy making up for lost time. She's fascinated by the way we use narratives and storytelling to make sense of our human experiences. She won the Dyslexia Prize for Flash Fiction in 2022 and has works in The Waxed Lemon, The Martello, and others. Karen will be reading her short story, Old School.
Hi, thank you everybody. It's been a real pleasure to listen to your stories tonight, and a huge thank you to everyone involved at the Selkie for producing this volume and this evening. This is a very short story. It's a piece of flash fiction, and it was partly inspired by images of women protesting about the murder of Sarah Everard, but also on a kind of more micro level, so the little acts of resistance that are part of so many women's lives that kind of go unsaid or untrumpeted, and ideas of knowledge that's passed down from grandmothers to mothers to daughters, and how we might resist and rebel if some of our methods of communicating were taken away from us. As somebody who grew up pre-internet, pre-mobile phone, pre-everything, it feels like sometimes. So this is my story. This is Old School. There was a moment where it might not have happened, a match not dropped, a punch not thrown. But the city burned for days, blue light slicing like a razor blade through the petrol-scented haze. Well, we took to the streets, grandmothers holding tight to the small hands of granddaughters, tired mothers arm in arm with daughters. Kettle for hours in a city square that had acquired walls of uncollected rubbish, overflowing bins filling the air with corrupted sweetness. They released us as the sun was going down, blood red behind eyeless buildings. Tear gas hung in the warm air of a July evening, streets still wet with the work of water cannons. One red shoe left behind when its owner was dragged into the back of a black van, a van without windows or number plates. Radio stations blinked out one by one, television channels after that. No one had trusted the newspapers for years to provide anything more useful than lining for a litter tray. When the internet went down for the last time, we swam through the days, deaf and blind, feeling our way towards each other in the dark, exchanging whispers and tattered rags of information about who was lost, what had been taken. One of the grandmothers remembered hand printing leaflets for school events. Another remembered fingers marked blue by carbon paper. A third found the key to a disused library. Two mothers cradled a green Doc Martin in linked hands to send a daughter over the wall. Now we spend dark nights breathing life into relics, summoning up a quiet thunder from old machinery. Slipping into the grey dawn, printers' imps with inky fingers, slinking like alley cats from the shadows, we paste stories to lampposts. Information buried in ciphers, news disguised as a plea for a missing child. We write as an act of resistance.
Thank you, Karen. I think that was our last reading. So we haven't had any questions from the audience, which is actually kind of cool because it means that I get to ask all of my questions. So we're gonna go ahead and just go in the reading order, basically. So start with Shantha. Shantha was actually one of the editors who worked on your piece. And we briefly discussed the mystery of the story, which is kind of an important element of your contribution, especially towards the beginning. And I was curious if that had been an integral part of the story when you first thought of it, or if it sort of evolved as you started writing and working on the piece.
Yeah, it's a good question. It was quite integral. So, I mean, no spoilers, but the main character is a kind of political double for a high up figure, and so he looks like him, but he's not kind of informed about that world. So and it's kind of told from his perspective. So I kind of wanted the reader to kind of mirror his kind of confusion, I guess. I mean, he knows something's up, but he doesn't have all the information, and he's always kept out of the big conversations. So it's kind of like you go along with him, trying to piece things together, trying to kind of put a finger on what's kind of, or kind of all the kind of demons in your mind that you build up from knowing that there's something wrong. But also I kind of enjoyed the kind of parallels with acting, playing a part and that kind of thing, but also in a sort of context where everything's political. You know, every decision you make in your life is political, and as much as he wants to kind of, I suppose, distance himself from that, and however little he knows, that doesn't save him, you know, that doesn't help keep him away from that aspect of it. So that was kind of where it was going. It was a bit of a kind of mystery element, but so that the reader kind of goes along with him.
I thought it was very well done, absolutely. And then moving on to Petra. So The Roots of Our Soul is a really great short story with a very heavy element of Slavic mythology, as you kind of mentioned in your intro. But it also puts a bit of a unique twist on some of the characters, for example, Kurent. And I was curious, when you were crafting his personality, did you draw from any sources or stories that you had heard, maybe as a child or something? Or was he mostly created the way you yourself imagined he would be if you ever got to meet him face to face?
Okay, so it was a mixture of both, I would say. I grew up with the stories of Kurent being sort of like this, a sort of a trickster, always there to craft a joke or something like that. But then I read a book that came out maybe like I think a few years back, and I don't think that's going to mean anything to people here, but it's only written in Slovene by Jakob Kunda. It's a duology, and it's called Skrivnost srži, which is the center of it is Slavic mythology. So And when I read it, I loved it. And Kurent is kind of this god trickster mythological being that helps guide the main character. And whenever the main character is doubting him a little bit, Kurent shows that he better not doubt him. And he actually says that, yeah, well, why do you think that I'm here to deal with Morana? It's not because I'm a comedian. Like, so I really wanted to apply that because it wouldn't make sense that Morana, like the goddess of winter and death, is scared of a joke. So I wanted to go with that. And I wanted to give him more power than what children's stories actually give him. So, yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you for that. Next up, I have a question for Jack. So Jack, your poem really struck a chord with me, especially the third stanza. I think is something that every creative can relate to. So I was curious what your strategy is for tackling that inability to finish a draft or sometimes even get started in the first place. And do you have any tips or rituals that normally work for you?
That's an excellent question. I would much prefer to hear your answer because I'm still figuring that out. I guess I really don't have an answer to that. I guess just trying to do as much as you can on that piece in the moment and then leave it and like I don't know.
Let it
Sorry,
breathe,
I struggle
let
with
it
that
rest.
all the time. I think I guess writing as frequently as possible to like keep the tap open instead of it being such an arduous process to get blood from a stone like once every blue moon or whatever. I think that with that piece in particular, I was treating it as a snapshot in the day because it was like I need to write a poem today. It doesn't matter how short or how long it is, but that's going to be a short window into how that day was. And it doesn't have to represent tomorrow or the next week. And it doesn't need to be any more than like almost like a diary entry or like a snapshot in that moment in time. So I think that really did help with that piece. But following on from that, I think I started writing a lot more in the moment and being less worried about it being like one piece to define everything. But then it's interesting to hear people have an interpretation of it as something more than just not a passing phrase, but like, you know, something other than just a snapshot of that day. So thank you. I'm glad it resonated.
It absolutely did. I read it and I was like, yep, I know that feeling. I'm pretty sure any writer or author who reads it is gonna be familiar with the sensation. You did a great job summing it up. So,
Thank you.
Next up, I have a question for David. I really enjoyed the metaphor that you use at the very end of your poem. And as someone who sometimes struggles coming up with creative, original, but also fitting metaphors in my own writing, I was going to ask if you have a specific process when it comes to metaphors, or if it just comes naturally to you.
Ooh, good question. So generally they come out of the poem that I'm writing. They sort of like find their way in, but this one was different. I actually wrote this as a response to a prompt. The challenge was to write a poem in which the snake is the hero. And when I thought about that, I was thinking about the only time the snake would be the hero is when they're getting away from like a bigger predator. And that led me to think of James Dickey's poem. So the metaphor sort of worked its way backward and the poem worked its way backward from the metaphor. And I wound up, James Dickey posits a heaven for, I'm sure everybody knows the poem, but in Dickey's poem, everybody is, all the animals are in heaven who, in their proper places, as it were. All the prey are happy to be prey animals, all the predators are happy to be predators, and it's like, wait a minute, about the prey animals, are they really happy? So The poem sort of worked its way from that. Often in my writing, I work my way the other way around from a real event or a real thing, and the metaphor grows from the thing itself.
Okay, thank you.
That helps me.
It does. It does. It was actually interesting to hear about the process, especially that, it wasn't the way I imagined the whole thing had developed. It was the other way around. So that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Next up, I have a question for AW. So visually, the structure of your poem is really interesting. And I liked how you used italics to sort of set apart the bits about the rabies from the main red thread of the poem. And I was curious if rabies was an instant decision on your part when you were writing this poem, or if you had considered any other diseases before settling on rabies. And if so, was there a specific reason why you chose rabies instead of some other disease?
So that's actually a very good question. I do refer to this one as the rabies poem before I came up with the title. The reason I chose rabies is there was a post going around, I'm sure some of you know the health site that is Tumblr, about a vet who had seen a rabid raccoon brought in, sort of a vet tech. And they were describing it and saying, never trust a wild animal that's acting docile, because it is almost certainly the last stage of rabies and it is incredibly infectious. And it got me thinking, when I transitioned, a lot of my friends, feminist friends, weren't great about it. And I've since watched some of them sort of descend down a transphobic route of radicalization. And I sort of started to draw the parallels between this idea that any time a trans person shows anger, shows rage, shows, I guess, resistance to being treated poorly, people are very quick to condemn, and yet at the same time can suffer incredible violence, whether physical or emotional, from other people, and are expected to sort of to take that. And it was like it had eaten their brains, and all that was left was this desire to spread the bigotry, to spread the hatred, to spread the infection of it. And I started to think about how an animal can look like an animal, can look kind of calm and fulfilled and passive, and yet be the most dangerous thing you will ever encounter. And I think the eeriness of rabies is what really drew me to it, especially as it is often mischaracterized as a problem with mental health. And it kind of started as two poems, one about Jane Eyre and one about rabies, but they sort of bled into each other, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you for that. Next up, we have a question for MJ. MJ, your poem beautifully expresses the pain of wanting what one cannot have, of challenging the status quo and the rigid bounds of society's conventions. Are there any great acts of defiance in literature or real life that inspired you? And how did you decide on chemistry as one of the main themes for your poem?
Okay, so about chemistry, I'm really inspired by my friend, the poet Leticia Jiju, whose poems are just so intricate and full of love, in using, again, really intricate imagery. I returned to her poem Praseodymium in Trapenset. It's just really, really great. And to answer the question about rebellion in literature and perhaps in real life, I think generally, I was generally thinking of the role of poetry and art in resistance. Especially during the 2018-2019 Great March of Return in Palestine, protesters were performing a traditional folk dance called the dabka under Israeli sniper fire. And it is in multiple cases throughout history that often poetry and the arts have incited and fed resistance. And so I wanted to argue with this poem that resistance, of course, isn't just screaming in the streets and military fire, but it's also an expression of joy and culture despite oppression and despite what is commonly said to be a hard fact, such as the thought that no two things can actually touch because our electrons repel each other.
Thank you. That's a great answer, and you're absolutely right. It is amazing how art can sort of transgress all of these borders and sort of speak up in times when we cannot. Next up, we have a question for Sam. Sam, your short story, as you sort of mentioned in your intro, your short story has a really whimsical, kind of dramatic voice, which I think works great for this piece. And it sounded like it was based on real events. So I was curious if that whimsical, dramatic tone is kind of the way you would think about this event when you think back on it, or if it just sort of felt right to tell it that way when you actually put it down on paper.
Ooh, great question. So in my career, and I think in the career of any naval officer, the moments when it becomes morally imperative that the individual essentially disobeys a direct order because the order is not ethical or is not correct are very few and far between. And I think the idea of trying to dramatize this and almost glorify this rebellious nature was very, very attractive to me. And so I first tried to do it in a way that was very serious and almost in the discussion of the Summers Mutiny and the Citizen Kane and very famous mutinies. And I realized when I was doing that I didn't want to glorify that kind of act of rebellion in that way. And also I wasn't that good at writing that serious sort of situation. So I decided to go more allegorical and more fun with it, and I hope that it worked out well.
It did. It absolutely did. Next up, we have a question for Paul. Paul, you mentioned in your intro that you sort of sprinkled out these bits of poetry and throughout your story. And I thought it was a really, really effective way of progressing the narrative, as well as giving some background to your protagonist's sort of mental as well as emotional state. And I was curious if that poetry element was there from the beginning for you, or if it sort of evolved as you in later drafts, basically.
Yeah, there was more poetry in it originally. It was every paragraph there was some song, and I'd probably done quite a lot of research into old school 30s flamenco songs. Maybe went down some rabbit holes and decided that probably wasn't the best idea to go down, and so I wrote some of my own. But it was also a slightly sneaky way of tricking myself, because I challenged myself not to write any dialogue in this story, because I tend to be quite dialogue-y when I write first drafts. And so to kind of challenge myself not to write any dialogue, I kind of got around that by writing the poetry.
That's pretty cool. Okie dokie. And then our last question is for Karen. Karen, I love the imagery in your piece. For example, the cradle Doc Martin that we see going over the wall is so powerful. And as a very visual writer myself, I was wondering if you had a process for recording images to use in your work, or if they sort of come to you naturally when you're writing a piece.
It tends to be that they come to me while I'm writing. I'm not a great note keeper. I'm always trying to do 37 things at the same time. So, and I think partly what I've developed a habit of, because my training as a psychotherapist is very much about observation, really close observation of people, of what they're saying, of how they're saying it. And I think it's kind of found its way into my writing as well, that the images are there and then they're on the paper. And also I think that I thought when I first started writing, I thought I was going to be a poet. Turns out I'm a terrible poet. I'm really bad. But what I do like is poetic, lyrical language. And then I found flash fiction and short story writing, and it felt like the place where I could hem in the lyrical and the visual and the poetic language without having to put myself or anybody else through the torturous process of reading my poetry. So yeah, that's how it works for me.
I can relate to that. I'm a horrible poet too. You do not want to read my poetry stuff. Okay. I think we had a question from one of the audience about author copies. Authors will get a free copy of the book. I will be forwarding you those after this event. So stay tuned for that. For everyone else, if you would like to support us and purchase a copy of the anthology, you can do that through our website. It costs £4.99, and you will be able to download it directly from the website and then send it to whichever device you use for reading ebooks. If you're interested in donating, you can do that through our website as well. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you don't miss any updates about future calls for submissions, events, anything like that. I wanted to thank our incredible authors for trusting us with the writing in the first place. I know the team really enjoyed working on this anthology and collaborating with all of you, so thank you for that. And it's been wonderful to have so many of you join from all over the world for today's event and read for us. And of course, I also wanted to thank everyone who is watching us on YouTube right now. Thank you for supporting these incredible authors and for joining in and celebrating with us the release of our anthology. We really appreciate it. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and see you later.